It is Women's History Month this month in March, and so we are focusing on women figures in the Bible. So our sermon series is called Hidden Figures. And so we are uncovering the narratives of women that often do not get preached about in church for many reasons. If you are a lectionary follower, oftentimes the stories of women do not make their ways into our Revised Common Lectionary. And so we'll be excavating some of those narratives this month. Particularly, we will find ourselves in the book of Esther for the first 3 weeks. Now, Esther is a book that is recited often throughout this time of year in many synagogues. This is the time of year where they are leading up to their big festival called Purim. And so for those of you who will be here on Palm Sunday, we will actually have a little mini version of Purim down in our fellowship hall after church. But they recite the book of Esther every year, all 8 chapters. We will not get through 8 chapters. We will get through 3 of them in this month, chapters 1, chapters 4, and chapter 7, okay? So in the meantime, I invite you for our Lenten Bible study to read along with us all the chapters in between. But we are walking our way to their big festival of Purim, where they honor the great work that Esther did to help save and free their people when they were in bondage under Persian rule. So follow us this month as we take this journey through the book of Esther, starting with chapter 1 today. Before I ask you to meet us in chapter 1, I hope you are following that there is this movie coming out at the end of the month called Shirley. Y'all know about Shirley Chisholm. I invite you to go and see it. I believe it's actually coming out on Netflix. So if you have to steal somebody's password, don't tell anybody I said that. Go ahead and do so that you can watch Shirley Chisholm's biopic. I love the story of Shirley Chisholm. She was the first Black woman to be elected to the United States Congress in 1968. The first Black woman. And then she made a bid for a presidential campaign. She was the first African American to present herself as a nominee for the Democratic Party, for the seat in the Democratic Party for the presidential campaign. And Shirley Chisholm talks a lot about the backlash she received, the threats on her life that she received while she had said yes to the call on her life to represent her people in the 12th District of New York. She also had to exercise her agency to say a lot of no's. A lot of no's to people who wanted to take advantage of her, people who wanted to tokenize her, people who wanted to buy her loyalty and boss her around on Capitol Hill, so much so that her campaign slogan in 1972 was what? Oh, y'all smart. All right, unbossed and unbought. She was an unbossed woman and an unbought woman, having to say no to many people who tried to flatten her significance to her identity as a token. She comes from a lineage of women who had to say no. Rosa had to say no, and Sophia in the color purple had to say no, and today's woman had to say no to some things. I invite you to meet us in the book of Esther, chapter 1. It is a long reading, but the tradition of our siblings who are Jewish, they read the whole chapter. I'm going to pick pieces of chapter 1 for you to read so that we can set the scene. Esther, chapter 1, I am reading from the New Revised Standard Version. And it reads, "This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Cush. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors and the provinces were present while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry and marble, mother of pearl and colored stones. Drinks were served in green goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine, yes, wine, was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by ordinance without restraint. Somebody say without restraint. They had a time, for the king had given orders to all of the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded 7 eunuchs, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abictha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But, somebody say but. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws. According to the law, what was to be done with Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Then McClain, one of his sages, said in the presence of the king and the officials, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only to the king, but also to all the officials and all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands. Since they will say, well, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard all of the queen's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt or wrath. Let us pray. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the collective meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, for you are our rock. Bring forth a word of liberation in this hour, as we aim to do the same when we leave this place. Amen. Allow me to reread one section. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who attended him to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused. Our message today in your bulletin says, Vindicating Vashti. I'm sure that is the acceptable title that we have to publish, but the title that I'm working with today is, It's a No for Me. Somebody turn to your neighbor and say, it's a no for me. It's a no for me. It's a no, it's a no, it's a no, it's a no. As they said in Color Purple, I can't say that here, there are children, it's a no for me. There are seasons when our yes is required. There are seasons when us saying yes to the assignment that has been placed on our lives is required. That is required work. When God calls us to do something significant, we are coached to say yes. When God drags us out of our hiding places so that we might bring forth liberation, we are coached to say yes. There are seasons in this life when our yes is required. And then there are seasons in this life when the disruption of the expectation of our yes is required. I will say that again. There are seasons when the disruption of our assumed yes is required. People have gotten used to our yes. They have gotten used to our presence. They have assumed that we are at their beck and call, that we will show up when they call us. They have underestimated our ability to say no to some things. There are some people in our lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives, in our political lives, yes, when we say no, the ground of their world starts to shake because they are not accustomed to being challenged in that way. There are people who have taken our yes for granted. There are some seasons when saying no to some things, no to some people, no to some organizations, no to some belief systems, no to some religious antics is the best thing we can do for ourselves and for others. People who assume your yes, spoken and unspoken, assume a certain power over you. They are used to having power over you. They just assume that you're going to always be there saying yes, 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 until one day you decide to put up some boundaries. Say boundaries. Boundaries. My colleague, Reverend Leisha Epperson, said this wonderful thing to me one time. She said, boundaries are the gifts we give ourselves. When we put up a boundary, we are giving ourselves a gift, but often when we put up boundaries and we start saying no, or maybe not yet, or I'm out of capacity for this, the people who have gotten accustomed to our yes start shaking in their boots. They have not had to deal with rejection in this way before. There are going to be some people and some places that are going to be undone when your assumed yes shifts to an audacious no. King Ahasuerus is throwing a party. He is throwing a lavish affair, a lavish banquet. The author goes to great lengths to describe this lavish affair in great detail, from the colors of the linens down to the golden goblets that the adult libations are in. Some say, is he exercising his excess, or is he exercising just the abundance? Perhaps he has a lot of money, and so throwing a 180-day lavish affair is a drop in the bucket for him. But I warn us against being impressed by Ahasuerus' wealth. You might say, Pastor Mia, I'm not impressed by that, because I've read the Bible and we see how clearly God despises these things. God says in Amos, I despise your festivals. I despise your conferences. I despise your lavish gatherings. Of course, we are good Christians. We have read the Bible where God has clearly lined out for us how much God despises these things. But if we can be honest today, I don't know if there's some honest people in here. If we could be honest today, some of us would jump at the invitation. Yeah. You would jump whether it was Ahasuerus' palace in Susa or the Easter egg hunt at the White House. Oh, I'm sorry. We jump at the invitation. Don't act brand new. You know, if you got an invitation from VP Kamala Harris, you would have been right over there. Don't act brand new in here. Listen, I can't act brand new. If Beyonce invited me to her hair launch, I would have been there, okay? If Oprah had invited you to the Legends lunch, you would have been there. This is the invitation of a lifetime. You don't say no to King Ahasuerus when Ahasuerus opens his palace up for an 106 months of feasting, of drinking, of partying, of relaxing, of going on vacation in a culture riddled by celebrity influencers who put up video after video of their lavish lifestyles and show us their car collection. They have more cars than drivers. Even in a church culture where prosperity gospel is preached that suggests that God's favor is connected to how much money, how much wealth, how many big and fancy things we have been conditioned to be impressed with Ahasuerus' wealthy and egregious display of his power. Ahasuerus is exercising his power in this scene in the most disgusting way. Now, some of you might say, if he has all this money, Pastor Mia, what's wrong with him spending it with your broke self? Why are you hating on Ahasuerus? Why are you hating? What is wrong with people who have that amount of excess and have been able to hoard wealth by exploiting the marginalized classes? You know, billionaires aren't billionaires because they are brilliant at a trade. They are billionaires because they are brilliant at exploiting people. Somebody ain't getting paid for Ahasuerus to have this amount of wealth to throw a 6-month party. And not only does he throw a 6-month party, he gets to the end of the 180 days and he says, you know what? I'm not done yet. I want to add 7 days on top of that. The 180 was not enough. So no, Ahasuerus decides, I'm going to add an additional 7 days for a smaller, more select crew. Perhaps this garden party is for men only. And I say that because in verse 9, the author lets us know that while Ahasuerus is moving on to the next phase of his partying for 7 days, Queen Vashti is throwing a party of her own. Now, it might be obvious that in this time, in this patriarchal society, that men and women are separate, but I would like to caution us a little bit, because what we have to also make room for is that there's more than 2 gender identities present in this text. We also know that the eunuchs are present. The eunuchs who are not quite men, but also not women, they fall somewhere in between. It is not just men versus women, but it is men versus everybody else. I wonder if Queen Vashti invited the eunuchs to her party. Perhaps she understood that her oppression was connected to theirs, and so she offered them an invitation. I wonder what they talked about at Queen Vashti's party. I wonder if she had hosted something like this before. Were the women talking about their lives? Were they talking about their joys and their sorrows? I wonder if Vashti's guests were talking about liberation behind their husbands' backs. I wonder if they shared their concerns. I wonder if they shared their desires to be more than trophy wives on the arms of their masters. I wonder if there were some women, some gender non-conforming people who planted seeds of hope and freedom in Vashti's head that led her to make that courageous move that she made, giving her the courage to dream of a life outside of being someone else's pawn in a game of chess, giving her the wherewithal to imagine a life outside of the palace that felt more like a prison. I wonder what they were talking about in Queen Vashti's party. The text goes on to say that on the 7th day, King Ahasuerus calls his 7 eunuchs, his servants, to go and fetch Queen Vashti. A great scholar by the name of Carol Bechtel says Vashti is the prime piece of property that will crown King Ahasuerus' 187-day affair. It wasn't enough for him to throw an 180-day party. He had to add on to it. It wasn't enough for him to add 7 days onto the partying. He had to now call his wife into the room to show his true and fullest power, his true and fullest wealth. It wasn't enough for him in this party with his friends. He had to call his wife out of her party, hoping that he could flaunt her around some midrashim. Midrashim are people who try to fill in the gaps in the story when things are missing. Midrashim have suggested that he wanted Vashti to dance unclothed before his friends. Other midrashim have gone further to say that he wanted Vashti to do more than dance before his friends. That was customary at the time. It was not enough for him to display his wealth in such an egregious way. He wanted to put a cherry on top of the sundae. He sends his eunuchs to fetch Vashti, and the text says that Vashti rejects the pageant. The text does not give us language that Vashti voiced herself. The authors did not even bother to put words in her mouth. Everything that we know about her refusal comes by way of narration. Vashti says, it's a no for me. Given the circumstances, patriarchy, and women being property, one does not say no to the king without consequences. I liken this to a public marriage proposal going wrong. Somebody goes to propose and the person rejects them in front of all their friends and family. This is what Ahasuerus might have felt like. Humiliated and embarrassed. And we don't know all the reasons behind Vashti's no. The authors don't give us that courtesy. Perhaps she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Perhaps she was tired of tyranny, tired of abuse, tired of mistreatment, tired of being a pawn for the king, not being able to enjoy her own party with her own friends, years of not having control over her body. Maybe some of you have been there. Years of fighting for control over your body, fighting over your reproductive rights, years of having access to certain spaces but no power, years of having to defend your rights, belief in rooms when nobody has your best interest at heart. I know some of you have been there. Professionally and personally, you finally get a seat at the table, only for them to move the goalpost. Years, you finally get in the room where it happens, and they tell you to be quiet. You are too emotional. You are too opinionated. You talk too much. Anybody got that on the report card? You talk too much. You finally get a seat at the table and they want you to resign. This perhaps might be what Vashti was sick and tired of. Vashti says no to the king's provocative demands. I imagine her saying something like, you want to behold my beauty but not uphold my rights. You want to parade me around as your prized possession while neglecting my prerogatives. Her no shakes the foundation of Ahasuerus' world. She refuses him while all of his guests are waiting and watching. The joke is about Ahasuerus, all of this wealth he has and he can't control his own wife. How embarrassing. How embarrassing. But there are consequences to Vashti's actions. Vashti's no has them shaking in their boots. Clearly, this has not happened before, because after she says no, King Ahasuerus and his minions, they start to scramble to create a law to fix the problem. They start doing damage control. Why? They don't care about Vashti's no. They care about what Vashti's no means for all the other women in the kingdom. Vashti is about to set some stuff off up in here. If we don't put a law in place to control these women, we will have a revolution on our hands. Vashti says no, and Carol Bechtel says this personal and domestic dispute has now mushroomed into a political crisis. They decide that they are going to expel Vashti and find a new queen. And not only that, they decide that they are going to put an edict in place that tells all of the other women in the kingdom that they have to do everything that their husbands say the way that their husbands say it. They put this edict in place. And I'm going to put a pin in here for a moment, because be careful about the initial edicts, because the initial decrees always balloon into following decrees that are worse than the original ones. The initial decrees, the initial laws always spiral out of control. It is a domino effect. This is only the first decree that is damaging. What happened in June 2022 was only the first piece of damage. That it has ballooned out of control now, and we see in Alabama things have gotten out of hand. This is the edict they put in place. The first measure to control the women after Vashti's pronouncement of no. Vashti's story is a dangerous memory. Many people have written her out of the history books. They say snarky comments like, well, you know, the book is called Esther, not Vashti, so it's not that important. She's not that important. Her story doesn't matter. But might I remind us today that there would be no Esther without Vashti? That we would have never gotten to Esther's yes if it had not been for Vashti's no. What Vashti does in this moment, although she does not see the fruits of her labor, she lays the groundwork for revolutionary fire. With her pronouncement of no, Vashti rewrites the narrative of the lives of so many who have been oppressed and marginalized under the weight of the Persian Empire. Many have attempted to write her out of the narrative. How dare she not listen? How dare she be disobedient? But I'm reminded of a great feminist by the name of Elizabeth Cady Stanton who said, disobedience to tyrants is obedience to God. That God was able to take Vashti's disobedience to people and turn it into liberation for the least of these. That if you go down the line, you see that God was able to take what was an unfortunate situation and work it together for the good of those who needed it the most. Some might argue that the dispossession of Vashti's crown was a defeat. But I'd argue that it was the greatest victory. That Vashti was willing to risk the crown in order to save herself. I'm wondering today what many of us in this room are willing to risk in order to save ourselves, in order to save our neighbors. Vashti Snow says to the people, I'd rather be an extricated queen than an enslaved one. I'd rather go back to being a peasant than to be under the heel of this man who does not love me and does not respect me. What we perceive as disobedience and failure was actually the beginning of a revolution. One that would aid in liberation. Vashti, like Shirley Chisholm, was merely laying the groundwork. Shirley did not win the presidential election, but she laid the groundwork for people who would come, the subsequent generations that would follow her. Sometimes our call is to lay the groundwork. We may not see the fruits of that labor, but sometimes our call is to lay the groundwork. Vashti says no. And in that one word, she takes back her power. Many people have suggested that Vashti's no and other women's no's have been about themselves, but I have to imagine that Vashti had a bigger picture in her head. It wasn't just no, I will not come to the king's call. No, Vashti's no was no, I will not step out of my integrity. No, I will not perform for you just so you can turn around and persecute me. No, I will not bow down to you publicly while you desecrate me privately. No, I will not shuck and jive for you while my rights are slowly being stripped away. No, you will not have the final say over my reproductive decisions. No, I will not accept that this is the best we can do while our neighbors are living in deplorable conditions. No. There was a list of things that she was saying no to that were so far beyond herself. I'm reminded of Sophia in The Color Purple when she said, all my life I had to fight. All my life I had to do what the church told me to do, even though it violated my integrity, is what she's saying. All my life I had to do what my daddy told me to do, even though it disenfranchised me. That one statement was saying, I'm taking back my power. Perhaps some of us need to take back our power this morning. We have to take back our power by any means necessary, even if it means giving up our proximity to power. That's hard. That's hard. It's a hard thing to say, you can have this fake display of power. I'm taking my power back, my life back. I will not be bossed and I will not be bought. It's a no for me. And if my no means being disinvited from the royal banquets, so be it. And if my no means that I will no longer receive those elite invitation-only invites, then so be it. If my no means I have to choose between your invitation and my integrity, I'm choosing my integrity. I am disrupting dangerous systems with my no. I am discomforting those who abuse us with our no. I am tilling the soil for seeds of righteousness and justice to blossom with my no, even if I can't see what blossoms in my lifetime. What Vashti is saying to us today is, you can have my crown as long as I got my peace. As long as I got my peace, you can have the power and the positions if it means that I get to walk away with my integrity. And even if it's the last thing I do, even if I die while doing it, it's still a no for me. Friends, this is a season to defy others' expectations of us. This is the season where we are going to be called to say, this is unacceptable. I will not be made a pawn in your dysfunctional system. I will not go along just to get along. It's no, for the sake of my life and for the sake of my liberation. No, for the sake of your life and for the sake of your liberation. No, for the sake of justice and for the sake of righteousness. We've been called to interrupt some things as they are for the sake of shifting toward the way things can be. And could we dream of a future where our no means something that will rattle the very foundations of this earth, so that we might see justice and righteousness and mercy come into being for those around us? That is our call today. I don't perceive Vashti's story to be a failure. I don't perceive Vashti's story to be one that ended in peril. It ended in a woman saving herself for the sake of others. And I invite you on that journey this year to do the same. Every time you think of Shirley, and every time you think of Rosa, and every time you think of Sophia, and every time you think of Vashti, I want you to think of your call to reassess how you want to participate in the transformation of the conditions of our living together. Let us pray. God, we are grateful. We are grateful for Vashti's pronouncement, for the courage to have a voice in a world that tries to silence those who disrupt status quos. We are grateful for the reminder that you have called us to think beyond ourselves for the sake of life and liberation. Let it be so as we go forth to do this work. In the name of all that is sacred and holy, let the people rise and say amen as we share in song together.